Chris Rose, MLB Network, joining us this morning on the show. Chris, good morning.
DA, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Doing great, thank you.
I liked what I saw from the Rays, starting a reliever, Sergio Romo, for one inning to deal with the Angels' top three hitters and then hand things over to the quote-unquote starting pitcher, because I love the idea of old traditional things in baseball being looked at again. What did you think about the Rays' attempt at really being unconventional?
Well, I don't know if you saw the quote from Zach Cozart, who's the starting third baseman of the Angels, and he said, listen, I don't get it. I like hitting 3 times against the starting pitcher. I think it's bad for baseball. I like Zach Cozart a lot. We've had him on the show. He's a pleasant guy. He plays hard. I think it was the most ridiculous statement I've ever heard in my life. Like, it's bad for baseball. Here's the deal. The Rays, for years, we know about their penny pinching ways, so they have to do whatever they can to be in survival mode at times. They've lost a couple of starters to arm injuries this year that they were going to rely on. We knew coming out of the chute that they were occasionally going to be using these bullpen days as kind of a fifth starter in the rotation, meaning it would be all hands on deck. Maybe a guy would start and go 2 innings and hand it off to the next guy and the next guy. But this is totally different. And this is not going to be the new wave of the sport. You will see it periodically play out. If there is a heavy right-handed lineup like this, and you plan on starting a left-hander that is a so-so sort of guy like the Rays had coming in line Saturday night after Sergio Romo, then why not bring out a right-hander that can keep those bats of Trout and Upton and those guys at bay in the first inning? Why not? The numbers show you that the most damage is done by hitters in the first inning since the advent of the DH. I'm not hooting and hollering like Brian Kenny is on a table to start this way, to start this revolution. But I think for teams that have mediocre starting pitching, you'll see it occasionally implemented. But let's get this straight. A.J. Hinch and the Houston Astros aren't looking and saying, hey, Will Harris, you go throw the first inning so that we can get Justin Verlander loose to come in inning 2. Like, if you've got the big dogs, they're going to come out from inning 1.
That's a good point. And I wish it was still 1988 and Nolan Ryan came out and threw 9 innings. I love when Clayton Kershaw or Roy Halladay threw complete games, but that feels to be dying. And so looking at things in non-conventional ways in baseball, I think is kind of a cool thing. And in this case, doesn't Zach Cozart's quote actually make the point where he says, I don't like it because it makes him uncomfortable? He doesn't want to spend two different innings with 2 different arms coming out of the chute. Isn't that exactly what you're trying to do? Keep the hitters off their heels?
Yeah, right. He made the argument for why you should do it, 1,000%. He admitted as much, that it's more difficult. And, it's kind of reshuffling the deck. Ever since the Royals really got good again in 2014 and didn't rely on starters past the 5th inning, and they just had guys that would come in and throw gas, players were like, we knew we had to get a lead by the 5th inning or we were screwed against them. Right? So now it's just kind of taking one of those back-end guys and putting them at the front.
Chris Rose, MLB Network, joining us this morning here on the show. What do you think about the idea that Shohei Ohtani should be part of the Home Run Derby?
1,000% behind it.
You like it?
Whatever he can do in those 2 days in Washington, D.C., have him do. If he wants to do the Home Run Derby, great. If he wants to do the Home Run Derby by himself, I'm all for that. If he wants to have a bullpen session in front of 50,000 people so we can just all watch and ooh and ah, I'm good with that. If he wants to hit all 9 times in the All-Star game, I'm good with that. We have to do whatever we can in this sport to put him on a national stage, because as big a deal as some people think we're making of it, we're not making a big enough deal about it. This guy is probably a top 5 pitcher in the American League already. To me, the shocking thing is how good a hitter he's been. Think about how difficult it is to be a bench player in this sport, where you're hitting every few days. That's essentially what he's doing. He's not in the lineup 5 days a week to stay sharp. And my man Millar, whom I work with on Intentional Talk, I think is just dumbfounded by how good and consistent this guy's stroke has been. And I think it's an unbelievable story. And if he had landed in New York or Chicago instead of Anaheim, where he wanted to be, this would be on the Today Show.
It feels that way because right now he's got 6 home runs and 84 at-bats. Even if he finished the season with 18 to 20 home runs, that wouldn't blow anybody's hair back. But he's a starting pitcher, and as you said, and exactly, and he's a top 5 starting pitcher in the American League. So he's a top 5 starting pitcher in his league and would end up with 20 home runs or so. I mean, there just is no equivalent to that unless we go all the way back to Babe Ruth, right?
I love it. I love what he's doing. I was disappointed not in him with the spring that he had, but kind of for him because I felt like he came over with so much hype and fanfare, and we were getting ready to see something we hadn't seen in 100 years, and you felt like it was going to fall flat out of the gate. And we had always heard that he was such a stud pitcher, and you were like, okay, he might pack it up as far as the hitting goes, and he'll just be a dominant pitcher, which could be good enough. But, man, to see him come out of the chute the way that he has, and by the way, there will be struggles. He'll have weeks where he goes, over 2 or 3 week stretch, 1 for 23 or whatever. Because that happens in baseball. But man, it is so much fun to watch. They just better have a special Ohtani category in the All-Star game is all I'm saying. Do whatever you can to get him there.
Now, there's obviously a protection on the innings that he pitches and how often they play him, and obviously don't want to burn him out too much. Do you think that will prevent him from competing in the Home Run Derby even if he was invited?
Well, his manager, Mike Scioscia, signed off, said, listen, I don't have any problem with it. Millar doesn't believe in the whole Home Run Derby, changing your swing. He goes, that's such BS. He goes, every day in batting practice, we have our own Home Run Derby. So don't let them lie to you. Just because it's a national stage and, maybe you're taking a few extra cuts. He goes, every day we have our home run derby for money. So that's nothing new. I hope he does it. I really want to see it. I hope Harper does it in D.C. because, I've been obviously to the last several of these. And last year in Miami, it was absolutely phenomenal. So let's see what happens.
Chris Rose, MLB Network, co-host of Intentional Talk. Ironically, maybe another guy that's not getting the attention he deserves is Ohtani's teammate, and that is Mike Trout. Statistically speaking, you might have to go back to the 20s and Babe Ruth's .393 batting average in 1923 with 41 home runs to find a WAR, which is equal to what Mike Trout is doing right now. Trout's batting average isn't that high, but Mike Trout's stats across the board are ridiculous. How good is Mike Trout compared to the attention he gets for being that good?
Well, it's not close. The gap is so significant. It might be the biggest gap of anybody in sports in terms of production and coverage a guy gets. I remember when I first started working for Fox Sports about 20 years ago or so, I was on the golf beat, and I had the joy of covering Tiger Woods when he was at the apex of his career. And after Tiger won the Tiger Slam, we were just talking to a bunch of golfers about what it meant. And I remember chatting with Tom Watson, who said, guys, Tiger Woods is setting the bar so high, he might not be able to jump over it one time. And I think that's what Trout is doing, because you just keep looking back at what the guy finished 4th last year in the MVP voting and missed a quarter of the season. Think about that. Who does that? It just doesn't happen in other sports for the most part. And listen, he's another guy. He's very much like Ohtani. He loves playing baseball. He loves being one of the dudes. And he just loves doing his thing. And he loves rooting for his Philadelphia Eagles and talking about weather. And other than that, that's what Mike Trout is. So he's perfectly fine without the fanfare. The one thing that sticks in my craw a little bit is the fact that the best player in the sport over the last 7 years has only had 13 playoff at-bats.
Right.
And in no other sport is the best player sitting out on the sidelines in the most important part of the season. It doesn't happen in the NBA. It doesn't happen in the NFL. I'm not well-versed enough in hockey these days to know if it happens as much in hockey, but I have a feeling most of those guys are making the playoffs. So that's the only thing that sticks with me. I know it's just a fundamental problem in the sport, but I hope the Angels get back there because I want to see both Trout and Ohtani in October.
Agreed. Chris Rose, you can watch him daily, 5 o'clock Eastern time on MLB Network as co-host of Intentional Talk with Kevin Millar. You can also follow him on Twitter as well throughout the baseball season. Great stuff from him at Chris Rose. Good stuff as always, buddy. I appreciate the time, man.
You got it, D.A. Take care.
You too. Chris Rose, MLB Network, joining us this morning on the show.